Hello everyone, Nicholas Thayer here with you again. Another Ableton tutorial, a very quick one this time. We're going to be looking at a couple of quick tips, ideas about reverb and making reverb a bit more interesting. Shout out to everyone who's supporting me on Patreon. Of course, you'll be able to download this project file there, in particular the effect rack that I'm going to make, which you can then use and abuse on any and all of your own work. So, going to begin. I've made prepared a couple of little things here today, so we can make it a bit of a quicker session. But first of all, a question, or perhaps one interesting way of thinking about reverb. What is reverb, and how can we use it more creatively or more intuitively? So I've made a little patch here. It's just a generative thing. It's in a sort of C Dorian, using a couple of the ideas from one of my earlier videos. So some chants on the input and then quantizing it. It's going into operator, as you can see. We've got some random velocity stuff happening, and then just a little bit of EQ afterwards. So when we use reverb, I'm just going to bring in a reverb after this. And for today, I'm going to use Ableton's hybrid reverb, which is sort of a hybrid convolution reverb. And it sounds really, really, really nice. So when we use reverb, you can just be a little bit quieter for now. When we use reverb, we're thinking about sort of modeling a situation, modeling a real life situation. And of course, there's lots of things that you can change on a reverb. But if we think of the two main things, the decay and the dry and wet, and how they function. So the decay size is effectively, so what a reverb is doing is it's placing you in a room with the sound source. It's modeling, obviously we have spring reverbs, which are a bit different, and blah, 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 blah. But, for the purposes of this, let's think, the decay size is the size of the room that you are in. The longer decay, the bigger the room. And you can think about that. You can think about being in a church and you get a much longer decay time than if you're in sort of a small bedroom and that sort of thing. So decay time is the size of the room. And the dry wet is you're then thinking about how close you are to the sound source within the context of that room. So again, let's come back to this sound. And so medium decay time, but a big dry wet. I'm quite a long way, or about as far away as I can get from the sound source in that room. But if I have a very small dry wet, but a much longer decay time, now it feels like I'm very, very close to the sound source in a very, very big room. So these are two ways of thinking about how these two things function on a reverb. But what I'm wanting to do today is to take this a few steps further. So I'm going to explore putting this reverb, we're going to put it all the way up. We're going to group it into an effects rack, Command G. Command G is now an effects rack, and I'm going to rename this reverb, and I'm going to create a chain that is now dry. So now what's happening is the audio signal is coming in the start here of this audio effects rack, and it's getting split, it's getting duplicated, and one copy is going to the reverb and one copy is going to the dry signal here. So now, because I have dry signal coming through here, I don't want any dry signal coming through here. That's just confusing the situation. And the way that I can now mix between a wet and a dry is using these volumes here. So again, if I go like this, and if I mute this one, mute the dry one, you can hear that I'm only getting reverb signal. And if I mute the reverb, you can hear I'm only getting dry signal. And I can use this to adjust the wet-dry. So what this now lets me do is be much more intentional with how I use this reverb as well. So it's not just reverb. At the moment, it's reverbing everything that comes to it. But let's look at a couple of things that we can do with that. And the first thing I want to do is explore using a gate in front of the reverb. And I'm going to mute the dry signal so we can hear only what's happening with the reverb. And what this is going to do is it's only going to allow the very loud notes to come through. So I'm going to, whilst it's playing, just adjust a couple of these settings. And what you'll hear won't sound that great because it's going to cut off most of the notes, and we'll be able to see what it's cutting off using the display down here. But what we'll get is a situation where only the loudest notes make it through. So let's have a look. I'm going to turn the floor right off, turn the return down a bit, and you can see none of these notes are making it through the gate. Only these notes are making it through the gate. Now let's make the decay a bit longer. Let's make that even tighter at the top there. Yeah, so none of these notes are coming through. None of these notes are coming through. Just occasionally we get a note that comes through. So now when I bring that back into context with the dry signal, we get a case where not every note is being reverbed, and it's a much more interesting effect that some of the notes have this sort of incredibly long spaciousness to them, and others don't have any at all. I really like this effect. We can take this now a step further and treat what's happening with the reverb as well. So one thing we can do is to sidechain that reverb against this original signal as well, so that it's always ducking down whenever a note happens, and that makes it have a kind of a conversation with that original sound. So I've brought in a compressor, hit this little triangle here to open up the sidechain options, turn the sidechain on, and I want to take the audio input from the same channel, from the operator channel, and I want to take it from pre-effects. So that's taking the signal from all the way in here. Now I can use this signal to control the volume of the reverb. And now you can hear that the reverb is coming and going as even the non-reverb notes are changing the volume of the reverb, which is a really nice effect. Another thing I could do with the sidechain and the way I'm controlling the reverb here is to, of course, sidechain against something else, not itself. So perhaps I bring in just a kick drum. We're going to use a drum synth for this, just a kick. Let's put it over here. Let's put it next to here so we know what we're doing. It's just to kind of, a 4 on the floor type dung 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 type thing. Turn you down a bit. Okay, so now I'm going to take the operator, and instead of the sidechain from itself, I'm going to take the sidechain from the kick. And now we have the very familiar EDM style, we have the very familiar pumping effect happening on the reverb now. But what happens when I turn the kick off or make it sends only? And of course, at this point, nothing makes it through to the reverb. There we go. So now you can hear that the reverb is having this kind of pumping effect going on. But even then, not all of the notes are making it through to the reverb. The synth itself is getting no sidechain. That's coming straight out here. It's only the reverb that is getting this sidechain from the kick drum. So it's another interesting way of playing with the reverb and separating it, but still making it have a conversation with the original source sound there. So this is a nice little effect track that I like to use, and this is a technique I like to use quite a lot. I'm going to switch this back to operator, so it's sidechaining against itself. We're going to turn that kick drum off. I'm going to now look at another application of this. So I have here an improvisation I did on a celesta. So I'm just going to take the effect track from here. Let's call this Reverb Gate, because it's a little bit different to the very famous gated reverb the snare sound of the 80s. It's a slightly different use of the gate. In that instance, you just put a standard noise gate after the reverb, so it chops off the tail. You get the that kind of effect. But here, I'm doing something a bit different. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to put it over here on this Celesta. But first of all, let's just have a listen to what that sounds like by itself. Love the sound of a Celesta. Really nice. So now I'm going to just use this effects chain on this Celesta. And again, I can just adjust the threshold here. Oh, that's a bit loud. Calm down, calm down. So now only the loudest notes are making it through to the reverb. Now let's set the sidechain again to be against itself. So all the little quiet tinkly notes feel right up next to you. And then all of a sudden the loud notes are filled with this sense of space. Or again, if I was to sidechain that against the kick drum. So we have that pumping effect happening on the reverb again. So there you go. A couple of quick ideas, different ways to use this particular reverb chain. As I said, if you're following me on Patreon, this will be available on the downloads there. Hope you got something from this. I was going to do something with this drum kit, but I think that's a nice way to wrap it up now. Maybe next time. There you go. Thanks for tuning in. Was that exactly when that improv finished? How about that? It's like I planned it.